So have you ever wondered why some English learners are able to speak a beautiful native English? Is it something that just comes naturally to some people while it's impossible for others? I'm sure that at some point you have fantasized about having that perfect American or British accent when you speak English. Now, while so many of us have this goal to have this native accent, it's something that's rarely taught at schools, right? Well, we're gonna help you out with that goal today. By the end of this episode, you will have learned the 3 principles, which are culture, curiosity, and musicality, to speak with a native accent from someone who has actually successfully done it. And we will also be doing some exercises that you can practice along with us. And if you are new here, every single week we make new lessons like this one that help you to speak English confidently and naturally. So hit that subscribe button and the bell down below so you don't miss a single new lesson. So Izzy, I wanted to kick off today's episode by addressing the elephant in the room. So those of you that are watching on video, which now, of course, also includes our dear RealLife English app users, right? So you might see that my eye is a bit red. I did not get in a fight or anything. I have a stye for the first time in my life. And I guess I decided it was appropriate for the first time that I'm back on the podcast after 2 weeks, that now would be a good moment to rear its ugly head. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no worries. I think it looks okay. But you did use some interesting vocabulary there. Stye, is that it? What is that?
I just learned this word myself because actually I heard it first in Catalan because Jordi was telling me, and then I had to look up, what do we call this in English? It's like, oh, I do know that word. So it's basically like a infection that you get in the glands in your eyelid.
Well, maybe you could say it looks like makeup. So it's like a stylish stye.
Like it's styling. Got that zombie chic look going on.
Yeah, it's working for you.
It's all the rage. So there's a lot of expressions too that we just use. So if you are not on the RealLife English app, you might want to check that out because you get vocabulary flashcards for all of them, and you can use those to never forget them and have them available to you in your next conversation. But today we are not talking so much about vocabulary, but rather about accents. So for those of you that are newer here and you don't know Izzy is actually from Brazil, although most Americans would not be able to tell that because he has a pretty flawless American accent. And we had a lot of learners who are really curious about this. They're envious even about your ability to speak English with this flawless accent. So we're going to talk a bit about how you did that, but I thought it might be appropriate just to start off asking you, do you think that that's necessary for most learners to strive for that kind of accent in English?
That is a good question, because that is actually, people ask me, okay, so how'd you do it? How'd you develop that accent? And if I'm actually teaching them, because students are often the people who ask me that, I ask them back, like, why would you want to have that kind of accent? Like it sounds like an American, but that happened for a reason. I consumed a lot of media from the United States, and I have this connection myself with North American culture, and it just happened. It was just more like a consequence that I have this accent. Mm-hmm. But I do ask people first, why is it, if you're interested, why is it that you want to have a native-like accent in the first place?
As we always say, start with why, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think for the great majority of English learners, the short answer is no, because it takes a tremendous effort for most people to pick up a native accent. And for most of us, it's not worth the effort. And a lot of people might actually even give up because their why won't be strong enough. It won't be a strong enough motivator. So it's really good to reflect on that. And actually, we did another episode all about this question of whether or not you should strive for native accent. So that was episode 331, which you guys can check out. We'll link it in the description. But Izzy, let's circle back, because in the first lesson that we did with you, which was episode 382, I asked you about this just at the very end. And in passing, you shared 3 really interesting things that contributed to you being able to have this native-like accent. So maybe we could dive into that.
Yeah, so I remember us talking about 3 pillars for developing an accent. Not just to sound like a native of any particular country, but just in general, accents and picking up on a specific style for speaking. You want to look at culture, you want to develop curiosity, and you also want to get into the musicality of the language. So talking about culture first, because I do think that that's the very first question you want to ask yourself is, what culture am I actually into? You know, what kind of English-speaking culture do I feel more connected to? Because if you know the answer to that question, that will already guide you, you know, in whenever you want to consume content from a specific region, or maybe you want to travel, just you want to connect with a culture in general, you'll prioritize that one because you already know it. Like, that's the one I connect with. And this isn't something that you can just like pick one because it looks cool. I wouldn't recommend you just randomly pick one, but really feel it. Because if you don't have one that really resonates with you, that's okay. But if you do, being aware of it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's been important for me with learning different accents. Is there were certain ones that appealed to me more, both based on the culture, based on the sound of it. I think that listening to yourself and what you feel motivated, what you even feel would sound right for you in speaking the language is really important. So, like
in my case, as I said, I identify with North American culture. But why is it? I've already asked myself that question. I think there's big ideas and ideals that are really prevalent in the US, more specifically, that I just feel amazed by. And I just feel that those are values that I have myself, such as pioneering, you know, just starting stuff, or entrepreneurship. You mentioned certain ideals that are prevalent in the United States. What does that mean if something is prevalent? Yeah, so basically that means that it is common. It exists in that situation. So if you say that in the United States, fast food is pretty prevalent, that's true. You're just basically saying it's common there. So. Worldwide now. Pioneering is a really interesting word too, because it comes from the pioneers who were the early explorers. And it's gotten a more figurative meaning that you said is sort of like entrepreneurship, starting something new. I think that's very closely tied to the American dream, that anyone can go there, and if you have a dream, you can make it a reality if you're willing to work hard for it. So that is something that's really amazing about American culture, I'd say. Exactly. And I feel like that's closely connected to English and to American English in that sense, because all these ideas, you know, all this culture is communicated through American English. Right. That's how I get it. That's how I receive it. And it really inspires me. I think that for me, language is a lot like music. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about the musicality aspect, but also in the sense that you can learn how to play instruments in music, and you don't really have a reason to pick an instrument. You can't say like, oh, you know, I prefer to play guitar because it's more practical, or no, like it's art form. So you just identify with it. And even being more specific than that, there's like styles, genres, like jazz or rock music, that you may just prefer one over the other, and that's okay. Those are accents, and you just connect with those. It's interesting you bring up that too, because if we're talking about culture, that's even a connection to the culture. Might be the music that you like from a certain place. So, for example, if you're, in my case, like learning Portuguese, it's like the music from Portugal, the traditional music, at least from Portugal, and traditional music from Brazil, they're very different, right? They would give you a very different vibe. So Brazil's got a very strong musical culture, and that might be something I think a lot of people even come into Portuguese because they really appeals to them, right? Like the MPB or bossa nova or other genres that really were pioneered, that were founded in Brazil, and that can lead people to music. So was that true for you? Because I wanted to circle back, because we started talking about culture, but what exactly does this have to do with accent? And if we're talking about music, was there anything about music from the United States that appealed to you, that made you want to sing like that, or to be able to play that kind of music and adapt that kind of accent? Yeah, I think a lot of the people who inspire me are from the United States. And obviously there's like Hollywood and really influential music that pretty much everything comes from the United States. I like progressive rock, for example. And there are so many bands from the 70s, from the 1980s that are from the United States. So I would say that media and culture in general, that the pop culture that I consume, it's also from the United States. And I just identify with that. And then you start to get curious about that particular culture. So that's when curiosity comes in, that I mentioned as the second pillar.
Before we move on to curiosity, because I remember you mentioned the other day that you mentioned now like North American culture, but you mentioned even the other day that very specifically Pacific Northwest was something that really appealed to you. And I was curious, even with music, there's grunge music, I believe, came out of the Pacific Northwest. Was that any draw for you?
I guess a little bit. So it's not just grunge, but definitely Pearl Jam is really huge for me. I'm a big fan of Eddie Vedder, the singer. And
the album from Into the Wild is just spectacular.
Exactly that one. Exactly that one, yeah. So that movie was also influential, I would say, for me to just get inspired and make the decision, because that's where I went to when I went to the United States. And it was just like living the dream for me. If there's a culture or a place that you're kind of obsessed with, I think that's very telling. It just tells you that's the one, or maybe the one.
You kind of just have to listen to that little voice in your head, or that spark, right? That really sucks you in, that builds on your curiosity, which is, I guess, what we'll talk about next. Before we move on to curiosity, it'd be really nice for you guys to share, what culture are you really drawn to? So maybe you can share your own reflection, your own why for the culture, the accent that you would like to learn, down in the comments below if you're on YouTube, or if you are not, then you can shoot us an email at hello@reallifeglobal.com.
Which culture you're drawn to? What is that, to be drawn to something?
I don't know if that's part of a larger expression, like a moth to flame, because moths, they're these bugs that are drawn to flame or to light. But if you're drawn to something, it means that there's almost like an innate or something inside of you that you can't control that pulls you to that thing. So there might be, even like you said with the Pacific Northwest, maybe you couldn't even put your finger on it. You couldn't exactly define, why do I want to go to the Pacific Northwest? But that obsession somehow existed inside of you, right?
Yeah, totally.
So let's move on to curiosity, Izzy. So what role does this play for you, or did it play for you in being able to adapt an American accent?
Okay, so I already knew, I think maybe at the age of 14, I already knew that I loved that culture. And for good reasons. It was because of identity and just a connection, a deeper inner connection. So from that point on, for me, it was just natural for me to get obsessed with some things. And accent and language, it was one of these things. So I started watching TV shows. And I think you guys know we're pretty big on TV series, movies. We have our YouTube channel, Learning English TV series. And I can't stress enough how much I was just into obsessed with TV series and watching the same shows over and over again. It was not just TV series in general. There were the ones that I liked more. And I'd watch and rewatch the seasons. There was one that I remember, one of the first ones, called Psych, which is this humorous, funny detective show. And I believe it's set in California, but it was actually filmed in Vancouver, which is, again, the Pacific Northwest. So for me, that was huge. Like, oh, this is amazing. And I was just like, there's like 6 seasons, and I was just watch and rewatch those over and over again and got really obsessed with the characters. I remember each individual character that I would just like really pay attention to the way they would speak. And as a teenager myself, like I would even like walk like them, going to school and just like feeling like I were those characters. As an adult, I think that could be more difficult for me to just get so obsessed with characters, because I think I've developed my own identity these days. But it helped to be a teenager at that point. But I think we can still like identify with different characters when we watch movies and series and get obsessed with everything about them.
Yeah, it reminds me of something I used to do with my students, which was adopting mother or father in the language. For example, I had one student who really loved Oprah and sort of adopted her as her American, mother, like her model for the language. When we're babies, right? We have mother and father. That's where most of our exposure to the language, to our mother tongue comes from. That's even why it's called mother tongue, because we're listening all the time to this person. So she would do a lot of work with Oprah, which great person because there's so much. She has podcasts, she had a TV series, she had like all this media that you could use. And like you said, with this TV series, that there were certain characters that you really liked their way of talking. And so you could kind of adopt that character in that TV series that you really like, their accent or their style of speaking, because it's different person to person, as your American mother or father, right?
And this is where live your English, which is a component of the real life way. It connects with connected. So you are taking identity, which is part of connected, and making that more meaningful with live it. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I know how to live it. I know how to live my English. Or when I speak, this is how I speak. Why? Because I connect with the way I speak. So you're not just speaking in general. You are speaking in a specific way. And this idea of being curious, you can get curious not just about the way you're speaking in terms of the sounds you're making, but also the vocabulary. So you just get a lot from it. And this is a value that you want to cultivate if you want to be activating your English more.
Yeah, that activated, I was thinking, because we have the always learning, which is you're always looking for those opportunities, and deliberate practice, because you mentioned about repetition of watching the same scenes and episodes over and over again, which is something I hear a lot from people who have that native-like accent, is the importance of repetition. So it can sound a bit monotonous to have to watch the same thing over and over again, but it really is that part where it's obsession, and that does make it more fun because you're doing it with a series, or it could be with TED Talks, or it could be with an interview with a celebrity that you would really like to speak more like that person, whatever the case is, right? But that repetition and like really honing in on the nitty gritty, on the details of how that person speaks, listening to the musicality, listening to the way that they pronounce certain words, listening to the connected speech, how they cut words, morph them, link them together and everything, and replicating that yourself through mimicry, right? Like trying to really speak in the same way, the same musicality, the same connected speech, the same pronunciation that person does. So Izzy, I think we could put our money where our mouth is with this, meaning we can actually not just talk about these things, but practice them, and you guys can practice it with us. I brought a few different videos. So your accent in English, I think it's pretty standard American English, like similar to my accent, or Justin is actually from Washington, right? So maybe it's even more similar to his. So I brought some ones that'll be a little bit more difficult. The first one is from New York, and this is with a meme, like TikTok, that was really viral. So we'll listen to just a few seconds of it, like 7 seconds, and try to imitate this guy's way of talking.
I walk and I talk, and I live in New York, and I drink water with my coffee.
Do you want to give it a go?
Okay. I walk and I talk, and I live in New York.
I drink water with
That's
my
what
coffee.
I remember. Water, my coffee. Something with the O there, right? The vowels are, it's like a diphthong or something.
It becomes like really rounded, right? Walk, talk, coffee.
I walk and I talk, and I live in New York.
My dad speaks a little bit like this because he's from the Bronx originally. I think he's lost. He doesn't have as strong of an accent as this guy. He's lost a lot of it, but I can notice some similarities in the pronunciation.
This guy's pretty chill, though. I know that New Yorkers can speak quite fast depending on the context. So you add speed to that, and sometimes it does become difficult to understand.
I've noticed from learning different languages, that tends to be the case of the biggest cities of any country, because like Paulistas, for example, are the same, that they speak much faster than people from, I imagine, from like Recife or from Minas Gerais, where I lived, or like Madrileños. Like I still have trouble understanding some people from Madrid because they speak Spanish very, very quickly.
Which is another aspect of culture. Maybe if you identify with that.
That's true.
Why not?
They're in a hurry.
Speak faster.
And even the way that he says New York.
And I live in New York.
So New Yorkers, they don't say the rhotic R, the right? They say it more like a British person would, like New York. Although they do a more rounded O than a British person would. which I believe a British person would probably say like York. All right, so let's flip over to the other coast. The next one is from a movie called Clueless, which is very famous for the Valley Girl accent.
But it's like when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right?
Yeah. What did you say there in the beginning? Cardigan fight?
No.
Wait,
Like
yeah,
a
I didn't catch
garden
that.
party,
Oh.
maybe.
But it's like when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right?
Garden fight?
But garden party.
Garden party.
It's difficult to understand. But it's like when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right?
You say going down. I mean, like she starts up here.
It's kind of a question. Yeah. But it's like when we had this garden party for my father's birthday, right?
Because you keep going up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you imagine a graph, you're like, but it's like
Yeah. It's the that Valley accent. They sound like they're always asking questions. Because they end with the upward inflection. It's the same as the Australian accent, that they end the sentence with this upward inflection, which normal accents, we do that when we ask a question, right? So just like when we ask a question, right? But they end all their phrases. So when you talk to someone who's from the Valley, you're never sure, are they asking me a question? Is that a question? Or is that a period?
Why is it called Valley Girl? The accent. What is this valley?
Is it San Fernando Valley? It's a valley. It's near LA. So it's people who are from there tended to have this accent. It's like upper middle class maybe area. And this movie Clueless, I think, was really famous because all the characters speak with this accent. The last accent, Izzy, is from Matthew McConaughey, who has a pretty pronounced Texas accent. So we're getting some of the main American accents.
Don't think that makes them mine because you cannot own a truth.
Don't think that they can make their mind because you can't own the truth.
That's pretty good. Don't think that makes them mine because you cannot own a truth.
Yeah, it's very nasal.
It's very nasal, and it has a very particular music to it, doesn't it? Those southern accents. We might say it's sing-songy, I think, is an accent like that has, it almost sounds like the person's singing when they speak.
Like input, actually absorbing the language, like accents, it takes time. You don't have to force yourself to do it. Again, if you really connect with it, it's easier. But it may take weeks, months until it just naturally comes out of you.
Yeah.
And when it does, it's beautiful. You don't have to force it, but it's kind of hard to do it in one sitting, in one day. So also expect it to take some time.
I'd be curious if any of you that are watching or listening, if the accent that you're wanting to learn is like a specific or a particular one, and definitely let us know in the comments if that's the case. And we also did a lesson on our other channel, on Learn Show TV series, where we looked at 5 American accents. So if you enjoyed this exercise, you might want to check that lesson out next. But before we move on to the last piece, musicality, I wanted to make sure that we took the opportunity to thank our Learner of the Week.
Oh, yeah. All right. So we have a message from a member of the Real Life English community. His name is Amin Mohammed, and he left a 5-star review on Google Play. And in his message, he says, I'm so excited to have been using this incredible application. What I learned from the app is that I can speak now more fluently, and without it, I couldn't have done this milestone. Therefore, I suggest this to everyone interested in English speaking to just use this app. This app will help you improve your English speaking, and after you practice with it continuously, it'll likely make an excellent contribution to your real-world English speaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's really great to hear that the app is making such a great contribution to your English fluency.
Many of you listeners and viewers tell us that you don't feel confident when you speak English. You tell us that you feel too nervous, tense, you get stuck translating in your head, and you simply just don't have a good flow in your conversations in English. And the problem there, I believe, is that you don't practice speaking enough, and so you never get to develop the confidence that you need. Now, to solve that problem, we created Global Speak on the Real Life app. Global Speak is a space where you can instantly connect with other learners around the world for short video calls, so you can practice speaking English together and make friends across cultures. I'm going to leave the link in the description for you to download the app. It's free to download, or you can simply search for Real Life English on your favorite app store. And if you're not feeling confident to even start now, let me tell you, That's okay. And let me tell you a little secret, actually. Confidence is only created when you have repetitive success at doing something. Now, if you haven't practiced doing it enough, how could you expect to have confidence in it? Now, that's why I say that it's much better to have courage. Courage to take the first step before you succeed. So you should just switch that mindset from wanting to speak confidently to simply speaking courageously, and then you'll see that it'll get much easier for you to get started. So again, the link is in the description for you to download the app, or you can simply search for Real Life English on your favorite app store, and I will see you there. Ah, yeah. Okay, Ethan, so we talked about the importance of paying attention to culture, developing curiosity, and within curiosity, there's the third pillar, that you're going to be identifying all these different patterns, these things that are repeating in the language, which is what you get curious about. One of these things is the musicality of it. You're going to get curious about the musicality of the language. Because as I said before, language is music. Mm-hmm. It sounds like music. If you pay attention to, if you remove the actual words the person's saying and you just get the humming, you know, like, it sounds like music, really. It has all those ups and downs.
And every accent is different, right? That's one of the things that most will stand out to us about someone's accent is not only the way that they pronounce different sounds differently, which is important, but also the melody that goes along with their particular accent. So like we looked at Matthew McConaughey with his Austin, Texas accent, has a musicality that's very different from my standard American from Colorado accent or Izzy's accent, mm-hmm. or Brazilian Portuguese. That's I think one of the beautiful things about it. And it changes obviously depending which part of Brazil you're in. But for me, it makes it one of the world's most beautiful languages, at least that I've encountered, because it has this really beautiful melody that goes along with the way that you all speak.
Exactly. So one thing I find interesting also about musicality is that it really touches pronunciation also, mm-hmm. and connected speech too. So it's all the same thing, but different facets that you're looking at. For example, with the topic of word stress, imagine like a word that has 3 syllables. There's 3 different ways of saying that in English, but even again, ignoring the letters, the sounds that you're making, and just focusing on the stress, the musicality of it, you see how different they sound when you have stress on the first syllable versus the second syllable versus the third syllable. So, for example, it could sound like da-da-da, da-da-da, or da-da-da, or da-da-da. Mm-hmm. And in a word that have like rational, that's a 3-syllable word where the emphasis is on the first one. It's like ra. You really make it long in order for you to sound more like an authentic English speaker, because I think this is the case for most accents, that the word rational, that's how you speak it, right? And the second and third syllable, they just become really de-emphasized. You can barely hear them depending on situation. So it's going to be something like rational. I find that for most Portuguese, Spanish speakers, we need to work on making the long syllables longer, because we fail to do that. So that matters a lot, and it's an aspect of the musicality of the language that is not even exclusive to the American accent.
Something else that's important too for that is the stress. When we have something de-stressed, oftentimes it changes, the vowel sound changes. And being that so many of us learn by reading, we tend to give the same stress to every single one. So for example, the word amazing, you have 2 A's there, but they have different sounds, right? Like the first one's a schwa sound, amazing. The second one is a long A sound, mm-hmm. amazing. And if you were to say amazing, you can understand it. There's other words where maybe you wouldn't understand it, but it sounds off, right? Amazing. Or even mm-hmm. this can change depending on the accent, that in British English, for example, they'll say aluminium. And in American English, we say aluminum. So our stress changes, and it makes the word almost sound completely different. Aluminium or aluminum, mm-hmm. or tomato and tomato.
So yeah, musicality has a lot to do with connected speech, with pronunciation. And in the example that you gave about the word amazing, that's one example of stress on a second syllable, the data, amazing. Or another word, decided, example. So if you nail the emphasis there, and if you make sure that the long syllable is really longer, you can exaggerate to really practice. You're working on that musicality, and you don't even need to know how to speak perfectly in terms of pronunciation to articulate all the words right. But if you get the musicality of it right first, it's going to come out beautiful or better for you. It's going to flow more naturally, and it's going to be actually easier to pronounce all those sounds.
This is something that for me, even it still is difficult. In the past, it was even more difficult. But with time, if you pay attention to this, it does get easier. And like even in dictionary, if you look up a word, it'll put which syllable is stressed. So it can be good for you to listen to a word. If you're not sure which syllable is stressed because maybe you don't have that musical training, then you can check at the dictionary and then listen to it again so you can like really hear how that syllable is being stressed. I know that that kind of thing's been really helpful for me in language learning and being able to better perceive when a syllable is stressed. So you talked about two things with musicality so far. The humming, we kind of glazed over that, but that's a really nice exercise. This is one that I've used a lot too, is even listening to a podcast. It doesn't have to be with music, but listening to a podcast like this one and humming along with how we're saying something. So what I just said, humming along with how we're saying something. So that you're trying to just isolate without having all the data about what is the meaning of the words that were just said, just isolating the music. So that was the first thing that you brought up. And the second one was about paying attention to the stress, which I guess those are kind of related, but I liked what you shared about this, doing it with just one syllable sound like da, like da 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 or da da da, so that you can start to perceive better where the stress is happening in different words. Do you have any other exercises like this that learners can use?
There's also sentence stress, which is applying this to the full sentence. There's certain words that will receive more attention, and you're going to spend more time pronunciating them and just spend more time with them than others. So in English, you have, as we like to teach, you have function words and content words.
So content words, they carry the content or the main meaning of the sentence. So usually if you were to look at a sentence and you just had the content words, you could probably, from the context, understand it. Function words add more detail. So like the content words would be things like nouns, adjectives, adverbs, names, places, for example. So function words, these add more subtle details to the sentence. They're the linking words. So you have things like prepositions, articles, particles, even parts of the content word. So like the ing at the end of a verb would actually be reduced, and it's more of a function word.
So let's try and find one example to really illustrate this with a sentence, and we're going to identify the content words and the function words and show how that affects the emphasis that you put on each one.
A sentence that came to mind is like, you won't get fluent with Duolingo. So, so you have the content words are, so you won't get fluent with Duolingo. Duolingo, of course, it's a proper noun. It's the name of a brand. Get, because it's the main verb. You won't get fluent because it's an adverb in this case. Get fluent with Duolingo. So you won't get fluent with Duolingo. The rest are function words. You, which is a pronoun, is a function word. Won't, which is actually a helper verb or auxiliary verb. These also get reduced even though they're verbs, right? You won't get fluent. And then with, which is a preposition.
So you heard fluent and Duolingo much more clearly than you won't get. And maybe even the word get, because get fluent is a collocation. So I'm just betting intuitively that if I just say get fluent, you'll understand me. I'm taking that risk just for the sake of fluidity. So you won't get fluent with Duolingo.
Yeah.
And that you can really see the emphasis on the different words. Also, what's interesting is that you can change that. It's not a rule that's set in stone. You could add emphasis to you if that is important in that sentence. For example, say you want to emphasize that it's you who won't get fluent, but maybe somebody else will. Maybe your brother will, but you will not, because that doesn't work for you. So you can say you won't get fluent with Duolingo.
Yeah.
So you can adapt it, but in general, there's what you said: content words and function words. If you master sentence stress also along with word stress, it's going to come out really natural and beautiful.
And with English, this is even more important because of connected speech. So we tend to reduce the function words while emphasizing the content words. So connected speech usually happens of content words linking to function words or function words linking together. So for example, with that, we could say a full you won't or you will not get fluent with Duolingo. But most natives would probably say you won't, not you won't, unless, like you said, you're particularly wanting to put emphasis on you, but yeah, you won't, you won't. So those two function words, they almost just blend into one unit.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I wanted to bring in a bit of expertise from someone who I really admire. His name's 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗶𝗀𝗵. We actually had him on the podcast. We interviewed him a couple of years ago. Quick interruption all. If you want to learn with 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗍's innovative approach, then you're going to have to head over to the Real Life English app, which is where you can exclusively find the last 15 minutes of today's episode. Trust me, in my own language learning, 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗍's advice has made a humongous difference in my ability to not only sound like a native, which can be important, but more importantly, for other people to be able to understand me when I speak. So you don't want to miss out on his fantastic advice. So download the Real Life English app now for free by searching for Real Life English in your favorite app store, or you can simply click the link down below, and we'll see you over there.